Well, earlier this week, our next guest announced that he was going to be stepping away from broadcasting after, I can't believe he said it was 40 years. That seems impossible. Truly one of the great gentlemen that I've gotten to know, someone who, when I started at 23, I was a punk kid. I was working at 1300 and 105.7. And I remembered, I think I shared this story, getting a phone call during a show one day, and he was just looking for somebody to hold a microphone at Ravens practice. But I was just grateful that Mark Viviano knew what my name was at that point in my life. He is Mark Viviano, and he is with us here on GCR. Viv, it's Glenn. It's great to chat with you, man. Thank you for taking the time for us. Congratulations, sir.
Thank you, Glenn. And I will remind you that when all of us started in this business, well, I shouldn't say all of us, most of us were punk kids.
Yeah.
And my first job, I was still in college, was at KLCQ Country Radio in Monroe City, Missouri. And I was doing high school basketball and football games. And it was so rudimentary and so long ago, but I can tell you, I was doing a job that I loved and
Yep.
I was living the dream at about $25 a game.
You know what's really funny? And I don't know about the $25 a game part, Mark, but like the more and more broadcasters I talk to, the more that are like, I kind of miss just being able to go call a high school football game. Like there's just something very romantic about that for all broadcasters. That there is something about Friday Night Lights and that energy and maybe a little bit less that you have to do to prepare. There's just something unique about calling high school football games.
There is. And the most ambitious, I will say this, the most ambitious work that I did with a team of broadcasters was when I was in Dayton, Ohio at WDTN. And on Friday nights, we did Operation Football, in which we would dispatch crews, and I would be one of them, to at least 12 games in the area.
Yeah.
And if you're familiar with Dayton, it's near Cincinnati, and Southeast Ohio is a football hotbed. And so you would go to towns that would pack stadiums with 10,000 people. And it was a big deal to have those games on the air that night. And everybody watched. And that was a day, there was, people weren't watching stuff on the internet. It was just local TV was a big deal back then.
I was involved with a show like that during the time that I worked in Arizona. It was awesome. It was the first touch that I had with doing TV. It was incredible. And there's something special about high school football, man. There's nothing quite like it. And there's so much that I want to cover with you, Mark. I want to go back. I remember watching the video you posted. Did you say it was 26 years ago that you arrived in Baltimore?
30 years ago. It was in
years ago. Okay.
July of 1994. And that's when I started at WBAL. I was doing the weekends. Jerry Sandusky doing he was sports director and still is. And Vince Bagley was still there. He was doing the weekend mornings. So I got to know and work with Vince. And 30 years ago is when I first arrived in Charm City.
So take me through when you got here, Viv. Was it, hey, this is the next stop for me on the path to, the other things that I want to accomplish in my career? Or, because I know that there was a national TV stint in here too. Was there a thought at all that Baltimore could be the final place for you, that I could end up making my life here for some time?
I guess so. Although I was 30 years old at the time and probably had a decent amount of wanderlust still in my system you're right. I did leave in 1999 to go to CNN Sports Illustrated in Atlanta, which was a great experience. I worked with some top professionals there, some network guys, and it really lifted, my sense of what I was capable of. I can say that. I think when I came back the second time in 2002, back to Baltimore to work at WJZ, that being the sports director at WJZ, getting that job, I got a 5-year contract at that time. I probably then thought, this may be the place. After bouncing around for a number of years, this just might be the place. And it turns out WJZ is where I met my wife Megan,
Right.
and worked for 22 years as I show myself to the door now. But that's the one. So the evolution was never definite, but it eventually did become so.
What was it? And obviously, the part of it is, we all know that you're in part a beloved figure here because you were the one that gave maybe the greatest news in the history of the city. But what was it about Baltimore that made you fall in love and say, this is a place that I could have be my home for the rest of my life?
Well, it starts with kind of like simple first impression. 30 years ago, they put me up at the Harbor Court Hotel. And I remember walking outside and to the inner harbor, which was just full of people, and going up to Federal Hill, where I ended up living for a number of years. And just, that initial impression was like, wow, this is a cool place.
Hmm.
I also, in my time here, really began to understand and feel that I grew up in St. Louis, that Baltimore and St. Louis are quite similar in size, makeup, demographic makeup. And I don't know, I think I felt a certain kinship or a certain comfort that this was very similar to my hometown. And that was when I have family visit from St. Louis, they would say the same thing. So that sort of justified that sense to me. Um, Moreover, it's the people, Glenn.
Mm-hmm.
It's the people that make the place, whether it's your workplace or the place where you live, your neighborhood. You can have a nice house and nice trees and a park, but ultimately it's the people. It's the people that are around you. And the people of Baltimore have just always been wonderful. My experience has been nothing but great. And being in a public facing position where I'm on TV, um, it was a wonderful way to meet people, interact with people, and everybody's been so kind. And it's funny after a number of years that I meet people and they say, I grew up watching
Hmm.
you, and I'm like, I'm not even grown up yet myself. How is that even possible? But just the overall kindness, the welcome, the comfort. I don't know. It's hard to describe something like that, but that's the best I can do.
Mark Viviano is with us here on GCR. Viv, I say this a lot. We will be accused, and sometimes I am one of the ones that say it about us, is that we can be Napoleonic in this city. And sometimes we'll hear people say that we're not welcoming to outsiders. And I've always found that to be almost the exact opposite of the truth, which is we're happy to have outsiders if you're willing to assimilate, right? Like if you come here and want to be one of us, Scott and I talk about it all the time. We will love you. Like we will happily welcome you. It's the folks that come here and want to remind us how much better somewhere else is, or constantly want to bash us over the head with the place that they're from, that we are not nearly as welcoming to. How quickly did you recognize that people here were happy to have you, and how important was it to you to say, I need to assimilate to the people in Baltimore and what they love and what they're into, and try to become one of them?
Well, let's say this. So I moved here July of '94, and in November of '95, which wasn't that far into my time here, is when
The
I
the
was able to break the
the Browns,
story
yeah.
of the Browns. So that sort of
That helps.
expedited
Yeah,
my
that
welcome.
helps. Yeah.
Because you earn trust at that point, and um, so that's part of it. Baltimore, I will say this, and this is not a criticism because it's not unlike a lot of cities. It is somewhat provincial.
Mm-hmm.
Like they love their own, and that's who doesn't. Like that's cool. That's a wonderful thing. But I kind of use this sort of a fun line at times. When somebody says, "But you're not from here," I'll say, "Well, I actually chose to live here twice."
Right.
And
Right.
if you were just born here, you didn't have that choice. So I chose to. I actually looked it over and said, "This is where I want to live." And the other thing I will say, and again, this is just in fun, I will say, no, I'm from St. Louis, like the Baltimore Orioles, who moved here from St. Louis in 1954. So, um, no, again, Glenn, the welcome has been great, and the assimilation has been wonderful, seamless. I have no complaints. This is my home now. This is where I'm going to be. St. Louis will always be my hometown where I was born. My family is all still in Missouri, but they love Baltimore and they love the fact that I'm here. So when I say my family, I don't mean my wife and kids, but my brothers, sisters, and my relatives.
I have heard and I have read you talking about the story of how you got the tip and breaking the news about the Browns move to Baltimore, and I'm sure there's someone who hasn't, but the part of it that seems so special to me is that this moment led to like a lifetime friendship for you, and I'm sure that there are people that don't know the story. Would you be willing to share it one more time for them?
Oh, of course. When I was still relatively new here to Baltimore, and I was filling in on WBAL radio for Ken Rosenthal. Ken, columnist for The Sun, would also do radio, and this was October of '95, and I'm on the radio, and the producer of the show said during a commercial, somebody wants to talk to you during this commercial break. They don't want to go on the air. And it was a gentleman in the area who said, listen, I've seen you in town. I like you. You do good work. I want to let you know something. I'm involved in the transaction that's bringing the Cleveland Browns to Baltimore, and I want to tell you about it. And I'm like, okay. Took down a name, which he gave me an alias, and a number, and we met the next day. And he had documentation of everything. I mean, it was real. This is a guy who didn't have to sign one of those confidentiality
Mm-hmm.
agreements, and he was willing to share the story. And at WBAL, we broke the story ahead of everybody else. And again, this was before Twitter. When if there's a story out there and it gets out there on Twitter, then everybody owns it and nobody
Right.
gets credit for it.
Right.
It's just out. But this was pre that time, and the Sun didn't have it. None of the other TV stations had it. ESPN didn't have it. In fact, when we finally got the confirmation that our story was correct and there was going to be a press conference, that confirmation from Mayor Kurt Schmoke called us and said, "You guys nailed this. You're right. You got it." I typed up a press release on letterhead at the TV station and faxed it to ESPN, and Bob Lee, then an ESPN anchor, read it. That's how backwards the times were, just relative to now. Anyway, the guy who initially called me is a best friend. He was in my wedding, and we've been friends for going on 30 years. A wonderful guy, and God bless him for whatever reason he took a liking to me. It's turned into a lifetime friendship.
That's such a cool story, Viv. That is so very cool. Viv, everybody knows that one, right? Like everybody associates you, and I'm sure you still get it. I know for years you would get phone calls on the radio, and people would still bring it up. But what's one that maybe people don't know about? Whether it was breaking a story or just a story you were able to tell or an interaction you were able to have. What is one that stands out more to you as being particularly special from your run here in Baltimore?
I'll say this, Glenn. This is not a one particular thing, but I'll go back to kind of the theme of tying together where I'm from and where I am. When I was a kid, and I'm talking elementary school, my brothers and I used to run home from school in October because the baseball playoffs back then were always at day games. They didn't do night playoff games. The St. Louis Cardinals were our love. We were St. Louis fans and Cardinal fans, but they weren't that good in the early 70s. They just weren't. They weren't a good ball club. But the Orioles were. And every time we would be watching games in the early 70s, the Orioles were playing. And I thought they were royalty. I just thought those guys were special. Brooks Robinson, Boog Powell, Jim Palmer. I just thought these guys were it. Well, fast forward to me getting to work in Baltimore and doing games on Masson with Jim Palmer,
Yeah.
becoming friends with Brooks Robinson, becoming friends with Boog Powell. And that there's a part of that that still makes me feel like that 7-year-old kid.
Yeah.
That I get to know, work with these guys, and it was just special. It was amazing. And yeah, not being from Baltimore, but having admired those guys all the way from St. Louis, and then getting to know and work with them. And one of the coolest moments, and this is funny, it may sound stupid to most people. So I'm walking into Camden Yards. This is probably about 10 years ago. I'm walking into Camden Yards. Walking up behind me is Jim Palmer. He goes, Mark, tell Brooks that I'm not old enough to be your father. And he hands me the phone. And I'm like, what's up, Brooks? He goes, people tell me that you and Jim look a lot alike, which people do say, by the way.
I mean,
I don't agree with it, but
there's something. There's something there, Viv.
we're the same body type, maybe,
Yeah.
whatever. And I said, well, I think he's definitely older, but probably wouldn't be my dad. And he's like, all right, we were just debating that. I mean, how surreal is that conversation?
Those two guys talking about you.
Those two guys. And I'm like, yeah, I used to run home from school to watch you guys play in the play.
That's so cool.
But I love that. I love stuff like that. I mean, the job we get to do, Glenn, I'm sure you have stories that, your average sports fan would say, God, I wish I had that,
Yep.
I never take that for granted. And those are sort of those funny treasures that you get to encounter because we're very privileged to do what we get to do.
Why now, right? Like that's the eternal question. Why? The industry certainly has changed a great deal, and I saw in your video the charity things that you want to do at this point in your life, and I have great appreciation for that. I think you know how involved I am with helping up in particular. Why? Why is this the time for you?
Well, because of how much I worked as a single man, I didn't get married till I was 49. I didn't become a father till I was 51. So I'm quote unquote an old dad. I have an 8-year-old son and a 6-year-old son. In those 40 years that I worked full-time radio, full-time TV. I filled in at Masson. I think I packed 50 years into those 40 years. So I'm done working. and it's not heavy work. My father drove a produce truck. I get to, speak into a microphone. I'm blessed. But more important than the work or the paycheck you get, more important is time, and time with the people that you love. And I turned 60 this year. I have 2 young sons and a beautiful and wonderful wife. And I was in the press box at an Orioles game last year when my son got his first hit in a Little League game. That hurt. That bothered me. And I had already been thinking about wanting to be home more, but that probably was the one kick that I said, this is wrong. I'm gonna coach the boys' teams. I'm signed up to be a coach for fall baseball. I'll be coaching soccer, basketball. That's what I want to do. Those are the sports I'm going to care about. I'm going to be volunteering at their school. I'm going to be doing, you mentioned helping up mission. I was there this morning, Glenn, with a group of guys that do the Back on My Feet run.
Yeah.
I'll be doing a feature story for WJZ on that. So it's time. Like a lot of things you just know, and I know, and I'm glad that I know now.
You do you still run it? I know you had some health stuff for a little while. Do you still do any running, Viv?
Yeah, my wife went through some. My wife and I met at WJZ, but we really got to know each other through running. We ran marathons together. I'm not doing that anymore.
Yeah.
No more 26.2 miles for me. I filled that bucket. But to get out and run for exercise, yes, still important to me. Still feels great. Still therapeutic. Body and soul, mind, body, and soul. It takes care of me. And when I can't or shouldn't, I'll stop. But so far, still going.
It's like the exact opposite when I run. When I run, it is hell for me. Booker wrote me into a few of those things. I was just
Oh, he did.
yeah.
Okay.
He wrote me into doing like the Annapolis 10K one year. He looked up. He's like, "Look, you finished in 25th place." I'm like, "I never want to do that again in my life. I never want to experience the feelings that I felt during that. It is not a pleasant thing, but I know how much you've cared about it during the course of your life. And then is it like, do you have any feeling of, I wouldn't mind if maybe I did a radio? Are you able to just get out of it? It's funny because you say that, and I'll say this to people sometimes. They'll say, but you're doing what you love. And I'll say, yeah, I loved it when I was 20. I don't have the same I can't. My passion, as you point out, is for my kids and what they're doing. And in fairness, that actually has driven a new passion for like the Orioles, because my kids are obsessed with the Orioles right now. Like, they could not be more in at the moment. So that's been cool. But are you able to break completely clean and say, I don't ever need to do anything in this field again? Or would you, have interest in if somebody wanted you to come call a high school football game, something like that?
I think no. The WJZ even asked me if there would be things that I would come back and do for for a special favor. And I said, other than if you need someone to lend historical perspective, and I worked here for long enough, I'll do that.
Mm-hmm.
But I really do plan to unplug, and I'll be interested in ongoing sports in as much as my kids are.
Yeah.
Like my son Michael, at age 8, he is on fire with baseball. Ellie De La Cruz is his guy.
My kids love Ellie De La Cruz. Oh.
Yeah, so I'll watch with him, and I'll answer his questions forever because he's got a million of them, and that's what I did with my dad. So in that regard, yes, and they like to watch football, and I'll watch the Ravens with them, and but I won't be at the stadium, and that'll be heaven for me, brother. That's what I want. That's what I need. That's where I'll be.
I have to apologize a lot to the Ravens and the Orioles. They ask me why I don't come out as much, and I say, with all due respect, it's time that I could have with my kids. Like, that's just the reality.
You're doing the right thing, brother. You're doing the right thing.
I'm going to put you on the spot to wrap up, Viv, because I know that your inclination will just be to name a lot of people. But can I ask, is there any one person that you would say has been most influential for you professionally in being able to do this for as long as you've been able to do this for 4 decades?
Yeah, it's somebody you won't know.
Okay.
My first job in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, John Campbell, was one of the hardest working human beings. And I'm so glad that I got to work with him right out of college, because I saw what hard work is, and I saw what this job requires. It is not a prestige job. It is not a, hey, look at me, step out of a limo and do interviews job. It's a hard job in terms of commitment and work. And John Campbell showed me that. And I'll always appreciate that, because I tried to carry on that understanding of what it took to be good at what we do.
Remind me when the last show is.
July the 18th.
July the 18th.
You'll be so sick of me by then, you'll say, I thought he was gone already.
Yeah. I'll never be sicky. I truly, and I said it a couple times, a gem of a human, someone that, and we've talked about it over the years, even when we disagreed, you disagreed like a gentleman. And I've greatly appreciated that, and just a smile and warm words every time we bumped into each other. It has been a pleasure to be around you over these years, and I'm so happy for you and your family that this is how you get to spend your time now moving forward. Mark Viviano, thank you for spending time with me today, and we will be in touch for sure, my friend.
Thank you, Glenn. Best to you and your family, especially.